Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the third episode of the All-Time High Web3 Forum. With me today is Carthy of Helios and Helios, and very well known in the Multiverse X community. I'm going to just quickly introduce what we're about to do today before we jump in and say hi to John. But hi, John, first of all.
Hey, man. How are you? How's things?
Pretty good. Pretty hot over here. We already talked about your weather, raining over there. So what we're going to do today in this third episode, the All-Time High Web3 Forum is really like an open forum for discussions of different things relating to Web3. So today we thought we kind of like had some high-level discussions on like art in the age of Web3. We've had onboarding and adoption and Web3, and today we kind of wanted to go back and have a little bit more of a foundational overview of like what even is Web3. So I'm super glad to have an expert on it here today, which we'll start with a little presentation on the evolution from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3, what the implications of that are, what the challenges are, and then we'll jump into a conversation about what all of that means, go into some more detail, talk about our thoughts, hopes, dreams, and whatever else we can think of. We'd be super happy to take questions and comments and thoughts from you as well. So if you have any, please post them in the YouTube chat and let us know what you think. Well, now time to actually introduce our guest. Carthy has been around for a long time in the ecosystem that both of us are most familiar with, which is the Multiverse X ecosystem. John is the community lead at both Helios, a social platform that will launch, I believe, next week in its alpha phase, and Helios Staking, a staking agency that is also the co-initiator of this show. So welcome, John.
Hey, man. Thanks for the introduction. I'd hazard to call myself an expert. Like, I think we're always still learning, and space is always evolving. So there's just always new challenges to adapt to and understand, and learn to manage. And we're all on this journey of just trying to see where these tools and these advancements, these technological advancements, are going to take us, and hopefully we explore like a little bit of that today. We have a little bit of a discussion. Like, you're doing some great things with on-chain smokers, like really kind of really sort of like embodying the spirit of Web3 and how you're building with your community. You're building for your community. You are building alongside them rather than just building this thing in isolation and giving it to them. You're almost like going on this journey together, and they're sharing the assets, or they're owning the assets that you are building for them. Those assets have tangible benefits in relation to like your mission, your vision, your values, allowing them to come along on the journey, have a very real part in it. And it's very exciting. And obviously you also held like a really successful chess tournament on Multiverse X as well, like the chess arena. I'm not a big chess player myself, but was interested to see.
Did you play it?
A lot of people get involved in that, and a lot of people support it, like rightly so, because obviously you're doing great things.
That was way too sweet in return for that. I appreciate it. So basically, before we jump in, I think it would be interesting to know a little bit about your background and how you joined the space, what brought you, what kind of piqued your interest at first.
I suppose like maybe around like the time of like maybe COVID 2020, early 2020, everyone had a little bit more time on their hands. I was always like, I remember a few years ago, like hearing and like watching about like the revolutions that were going on in Egypt and that area of the world, like the governmental like being overthrown and maybe new dynamics of power being introduced. And I remember at that time thinking like, the next revolution in the world, because obviously I was just anecdotally beginning to observe maybe like a, let's say, like a disparity between like the top half and the bottom half of like, or like the classes, if you want to call them, or like the wealth gap, the wealth distribution gap. And I was just thinking, like, what if in the future people, the same way they're just choosing not to recognize this government and they're embarking on this revolution and all mobilizing together to create this movement and legitimize this new like leadership, what if similarly people just choose like not to recognize money as it currently exists? I remember having that thought, and I remember coming across Bitcoin, but being maybe a little bit younger at the time, like I just was a bit lazy and didn't really delve any further into it until I had a little bit more time in my hands. At that moment, bought my first bit of Bitcoin, bought my first bit of Ethereum, and since then obviously came across some great people, like Kevin, mainly, lucky to have the opportunity to maybe get involved with him and help out with Helios a little bit. But since then, just like been participating in the space, learning about the space, and learning about the opportunities it presents. But really, it's just what excites me most probably about it is how the technology presents an opportunity to really dramatically shift and dramatically like transform many of the things that are currently probably very inefficient and don't leave a lot of room for innovation, because they're quite monopolized and quite closed. So like the financial system's the obvious kind of example of that, in terms of only if you have the capital to start up a bank, you have the capital to provide, to create a financial institution, or have the backing, like that would allow you to do that, whether that's like you have connections or networks to get involved in that industry. Now theoretically there could be like a crowdsourced bank, which is essentially DeFi, and nobody has to trust each other. They can all trustlessly interact with smart contracts, and a bank can be built and formed with the power of billions of people backing it with the real collateral, rather than it being operated in an non-transparent and closed manner. I don't know if that made a lot of sense. Like I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent there. But that's essentially what excites me, man, the possibilities for the future and how it can transform behaviors, and it can transform the way we're interacting with value, transferring value, interacting with each other at scale, and the trustlessness can foster great collaboration and innovation, I think, going forward, you know.
I think that's the main thing, like the way that we lose ourselves in these answers is very much a sign of how many opportunities and how many different things there are going on, right? Like you dive into one thing, and you're here maybe for one reason, like maybe the financial inclusion or financial independence or something. Independence was what brought you here, but then you kind of find this thing, like, wait, you can do this with it too, and that, and so like I think in these kind of meandering answers lies like the intrigue and the dynamics of this space a little bit, because I think there's so much to explore and there's so many opportunities, and we're still barely scratching the surface in terms of what we're actually doing with the technology. And that's, I think, what makes it so fascinating. Having said that, let's lay a foundation. Let's get into the presentation. Get a little bit back to the basics, and then once we're we have basically everybody on the same page, we'll try to explore a bunch of these things that you've touched on here in some more depth. I'm going to start the presentation. I hope you can see it on YouTube, etc. Because we're still living in the dark ages, John and I, in terms of how we organize this thing. So, John, we can't see your face, but we can see the presentation. Take it away whenever you're ready.
Sweet man. Are we on the second page? So we're on like Web 1, Web 2, Web 3.
Yes, sir.
Beautiful. I'm seeing this on the stream as well. So yeah, I suppose like if we're to take this graphic and this simple graphic, the simplest way of explaining it, and it's been like explained this way probably multiple times, and it's the way that probably makes the most sense to most people, is like Web 1 was read, Web 2 was write, Web 3 was own. And I think if we're to like maybe take it on a broader sense, it's transitional from permissioned and conditional to permissionless and unconditional. As if we look at that graphic that's there on the screen, and we talk about the likes of Twitter, the likes of Meta, the likes of Google, less so Netflix because there's less sort of a social dynamic involved in it. But your ability to participate on that platform is permissioned and conditional based on, it's like free speech with an asterisk essentially, where you can talk as long as you don't interfere with the centralized agenda of the platform. So if you start discussing ideas, discussing concepts that don't align maybe with the terms and conditions or the centralized terms and conditions of the platform, you may find your permission to participate revoked. And if we go to Web3, the dynamics of it, where essentially and if we go on to the next slide as we move on, it'll be a sense of it's open source, it's decentralized, it's modular. Web3, there is no central point of failure. There is no central person that controls the platform. You don't have to disclose any of your data or disclose any of your identity to maybe join in the discussion, join in the platforms, interact with these dApps that are built upon this blockchain infrastructure. It changes the dynamic of maybe going from a place of permissioned and conditional to a place of permissionless and unconditional, which is very, very exciting, like we chatted about earlier, in terms of the opportunities it presents to revolutionize and transform some of like the institutions as we know them. I hope that was a reasonable start. So if we move on, like say, like what is Web3? It's just like open source, decentralized, modular. I see we have that on the screen there now. Moving on from like maybe what is Web3, then we're talking about like the advantages that Web3 might present over Web2. And if we touch on maybe some of those things where it was open source, decentralized, modular, the modularity of it presents great opportunities in terms of the interoperability. And we're looking at that in terms of the Multiverse X ecosystem at the moment, where you've got the likes of Hatom, who are a DeFi protocol that just launched today with their lending and their liquid staking protocols. You've got them integrating a lot of modules and like essentially the infrastructures that they're building and the dApps that they're building being able to interact with each other, like in terms of ash swap, and then they're being able to talk to like the X exchange, and they're all able to build on top of each other rather than build in an isolated manner. So the growth opportunities compound and build with each addition to the ecosystem, if that makes sense. And we're seeing that like where teams can add innovations on top of innovations, and the open source nature allows builders to enter and add their quality and their skills and their knowledge and their expertise to advance the industry, advance the ecosystem, advance the concepts. And it's a far more efficient method of innovation than maybe existed before, where people had to have permission to build on top of things, or had to be allowed being given a certain element of permission to enter the ecosystem, if that makes sense, and build on top of already existing platforms. If we talk about the transparency, that really, let's say, ties in with the whole thing of the blockchain facilitates in terms of financial system, that transparency. The smart contracts are oftentimes autonomous, self-executing, so there doesn't need to be any sort of like trust involved, or any sort of, there doesn't need to be any element of trust involved for people to sorry, apologies, I'm just losing my train of thought a little bit here, but there doesn't need to be trust for people to cooperate and collaborate with each other. In that, like what I was talking about earlier, when people are going to build a bank, previously there would be a case of, okay, I need to have a large amount of capital to set up this bank, and I have to have a large amount of resources, and I have to have the prerequisite networking capabilities to allow myself to comply with the regulatory environment to get to set this thing up. Whereas now it's a case of, okay, instead of, because of smart contracts and because of the transparency of the blockchain and because of the permissionless nature, you can mobilize capital at scale without any one person involved needing to trust any other person, which removes a large element of the reason why maybe people could not mobilize, like on a global level, a large amount of capital. And DeFi maybe breaks down large financial barriers and allows a larger amount of people, almost anyone in the world, to access great financial capabilities that were previously maybe not possible to access because of these sorry because of these obstacles that could not be overcome. So
Makes sense. I moved you on to the community-centric slide already here by accident.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Sweet man, no problem. If we move on to, like, maybe if we move on from the element of like what is Web3 and the advantages over Web2, and we move on to the community-centric nature of Web3, where we're talking about people's ability to mobilize capital and mobilizing community at scale on a global level. The opportunity for tokenization, tokenized economies, giving people ownership of the communities and ownership of the ecosystems that they are involved in, and the decentralized governance opportunities that are possible as a result of these things. It moves from a place of like building for people, as in I build something in isolation and I'm just going to go and sell it to you, to a case of I'm building with you and I'm going to give you a direct say and a direct level of input and ownership in this thing that we are building together, if that makes sense. And I'm going to use you at OCS as a great example, where obviously you saw like a niche or an opportunity in the cannabis space, where at a certain moment, because of COVID, people were being cut off from their local shops, and you wanted to give them an opportunity for like to maybe if you were in a locality in a small town in Europe where there might only be 10 people that are interested in the same niche interest as you want to be able to go, okay, can I connect 10,000 people who might have the same interest, and let's see, can we use this opportunity and these economies of scale to create something greater, if that makes sense. And now you've created and mobilized a community that ended up with a great like community meetup in Tourmaline when you guys had your party, if that makes sense. And I was chatting to you earlier, we were talking about the Taylor Swift tickets at the moment. She's very, very popular, and I know there's a great clamour to get her tickets, and there's supposed to be this sort of she's supposed to be rewarding her earlier fans, but obviously at a certain moment it becomes quite hard to reward your early fans when you're not able to prove who was or was not early to supporting you, if that makes sense. So say if Taylor Swift had the opportunity to tokenize, sell digital assets to her fans earlier in the form of people who owned tickets from her earlier shows back in maybe 2014, 2015, and they would now be able to redeem tickets, or they would now be able to access tickets with a priority nature over people who maybe did not support her as early, or did not get her to this point of her journey. So NFTs and digital assets can almost act as like a proof of lineage, a proof of heritage, a proof of trust, a proof of support, if that makes sense. If we move on to the next part, we've got like the permissionless nature of Web3. It's P2P, like I was touching on, a trustless economy. Smart contracts are going to mean that most intermediaries are going to be replaced by self-executing smart contracts. And I suppose the permissionless nature of the blockchain and the Web3 environment is really important, especially in places maybe where the fiat currency that they have access to or operate in relation to would be quite unstable, or maybe the social climate might be unstable, and that certain people find their access to financial participation restricted, because of maybe social or cultural norms that might be in the area. So if we think of like maybe in certain territories in the Middle East, women can find themselves like unable to open bank accounts, and blockchain and the permissionless nature of DeFi might allow them to participate and find a way out of that, or find a way to store and transact value that might allow them to access opportunities that they might not otherwise have had access to in traditional infrastructures and traditional situations. Moving on then to like the speed, security, and scalability. I suppose this is going to tie into like what we chat about at the end, where we maybe discuss a little bit about what the next steps are going to be for Web3 and how it's going to evolve and move into the future. But obviously the first iteration of blockchain was maybe Bitcoin, Ethereum, or at least the first iteration as we know it, like cryptocurrency and participation or blockchain maybe coming to the fore at a global scale. But I suppose they came with their problems in terms of the design and the architecture meant there was a higher cost, a lower speed, and you could argue like greater decentralization properties in that like really like anyone can access them, but it's the decentralization that also makes them, or the level of decentralization required, that maybe incurs the high cost and leads to the lower speeds. And that like on both of those infrastructures, almost everybody on the network or has to validate transactions, and the blocks themselves can only carry and handle a certain number of transactions. Obviously, let's say the scalability question that comes with only being able to finalize maybe 7 to 15 transactions per second means that those sort of architectures are not going to fulfill the nature or fulfill the obligation of being like a global currency or being something that is able to be adapted at scale. So solutions had to be built on top of them, but they come with their own problems in terms of, let's say, corrupting the idea of finalization at the moment. So like layer 2 solutions that are built on top, and maybe they sacrifice some of the core tenets of the blockchain, which is of like finality and verifiability, for like the speed and scalability. And then that comes about the layer 1 revolution, where we had the likes of like Multiverse X, we have the likes of Injective, and you have the likes of, obviously there's multiple like Solana, AVAX, Doc, Cardano. There was like a layer 1 influx where they were trying to solve the blockchain trilemma, or at least try to solve it to a level that it preserved most of the integrity of like what Bitcoin and Ethereum were at the beginning, and trying to find a balance between speed, security, decentralization, scalability, to ensure like usability for the user, yet also like provide usability in terms of the experience of the speed, but also, and the low cost, but also provide the decentralization or enough decentralization that it would be robust to centralized forces manipulating or corrupting the environment. That probably leads us on to the little bit of a discussion we're going to have at the end, where bridging the gap is going to be the next question, where we've got these infrastructures that like are allowing us to transfer or transact great amounts of value at scale, but sometimes the quality of the tools with which people interact with the blockchain might not be of a great quality, or might be too complex for people who don't have a certain amount of education and awareness of Web3 and of blockchain to understand. And I suppose that's where some of the tools Multiverse X are building, where you've got like X Portal, you've got X Money, I know Injective, there's like Kepler Wallet. I know like other blockchains are also building good solutions to bridge that gap between like Web 2 and Web 3 and simplify the integration and the onboarding process. But I suppose that's probably going to be one of the next steps in the evolution of the space is we have these tools, we have the ability to be able to deploy them at scale, but now people have to be able to interact with them in a simple, consistent way that you could explain to like your grandmother or your mother who might not be as technologically savvy as like a younger person, if that makes sense. And if we lead that on then to the obstacles, in terms of the obstacles, we had like the regulatory environment is obviously going to pose some element of a problem, in that like some of the mission and the aim of blockchain and Web3 technology, it runs in direct contradiction to governmental control. So obviously striking that balance between or finding a regulatory environment that will allow it to thrive is going to be a challenge, and we see that at the moment where there was obviously the SEC were pushing back quite hard, but recently like Ripple or XRP won a case where they did not have to be designated as security, which is gives great promise to the industry and of blockchain thriving further. Integration in terms of then once the regulatory challenges might be overcome, then it's integrating these decentralized services or these blockchain like architectures with current traditional financial architectures. So how will DeFi integrate with TradFi? And then other obstacles are things like smart contract risk, where if there's any inherent problems with the designs of the blockchains, and they leave opportunity for like hacks or malicious activities to occur. As a result of no fault of users, they could be at risk of like losing their value or losing their funds, and then self-custodial risk, where people obviously have lost like their seed phrases at different moments as well. If we move on then, where we talk about like where we're at now, I suppose that leaves us to like really focusing the next step for Web3, and where people are going to go is like prioritizing user experience, prioritizing education awareness, and then finding a way to connect the web of value. We have like we're talking about all the layer ones that are all connecting, are collecting certain amounts of value and allowing certain amounts of value to be transacted. And how can we make all those webs or weave all those webs together to create a greater environment of interoperability and connectedness that will almost allow like liquidity and growth to happen at a greater scale, if that makes sense. I suppose that, like, sorry if I went on a little bit of a tangent there at certain moments. I don't do these presentations very often, and I lost my train of thought a couple of times. But I think like if you have any thoughts that you could add, man, and we can just discuss, because that would probably be a little bit easier for me to maybe go from.
For sure. First of all, thank you for the intro. I think you touched on so many things that are important. I think maybe the thing that I want to connect with first, or talk a little bit more about first, is this kind of like, where are we now? Like, you came here, you know, you said the first thing that excited you was kind of this revolutionary thing that might happen, especially in finance, and you mentioned free speech and all of this in governments as well. What is it that you find, like, what excites you right now in this space, and how have you seen kind of like the, say, like even today versus 2, 3, 4 years ago, it makes a huge difference. Where do you see like, what do you think is happening now, and where do you see this going at the moment?
I suppose like what excites me right now at the moment is probably, like I was touching on at the start, is the opportunity for like things that are just, or processes that are just really inefficient, and they're just being made like increasing in magnitudes of efficiency. So if we go like, DeFi is probably the thing like I'm most excited about and excited to see how it will develop. if we look at like the financial system, where essentially, and like from Ireland, it's quite difficult to obtain like a mortgage. It's quite difficult to get permission to get credit. And then if we look at the launch of like Hatem today, essentially getting credit from a traditional financial institution in Ireland is quite conditional on the subjective criteria that they apply to you. So they will look at your habits, your behaviors, and they will apply subjective judgments on those things, and can then decide, okay, we want to give you credit or we don't want to give you credit, regardless of whether you can objectively can or cannot pay it back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, totally. Like the idea of financial inclusion, I think, is basically one of the first things that got me excited about the space. And I think Kevin is really a great person to speak on that, and what Helios does is so interesting in terms of that specifically, right? Like, Helios, for those who don't know, is a staking provider, and like one of the things that they do is they have like a quarterly or I'm not sure distribution of funds, and it doesn't matter how much you have in your bank account. Everybody gets like the same interest paid to them on a regular basis, which I thought was a really interesting concept. And I think there's a lot of concepts that revolve around that. And you mentioned like the financial system at the moment, as it's built, is also built to exclude people from it. And in this decentralized space, there is room for people who traditionally don't even have access to a bank account. There's room for people who don't have access to loans, to mortgages, to all of these things, because you can peer-to-peer crowdsource essentially what you need a bank for in the traditional system. And I think, yeah, that's one of the things that I found very compelling in the beginning. And it's so you're basically you've remained pretty much like on that, like that was your first thing, and that's still the thing you're most excited about.
I think so, man. I think it's especially with the evolution of layer ones and the evolution of the blockchain environment itself, like low cost, high speed, still maintaining a good level of decentralization layer ones, and the opportunity that presents for DeFi is different to even the opportunity that was presented for DeFi when Ethereum was realistically the only place upon which DeFi protocols could be suitably built. So like the evolution in the architecture itself leads to an even greater level of excitement on my behalf about the potential of DeFi, because it's going to lead to even a greater ability to access the opportunities, because the cost of entry and the accessibility of the opportunities is that much higher than when like you might have to pay due to the design of the blockchain and the design of the technology. You might have to pay upwards of $20, $30, $40, $50 to just make a transaction.
Yeah.
So now it's okay, and I suppose that goes back to like the opportunities that these present, and it's like trying to align and mobilize communities at scale, and it's trying to find the right dynamics between stakers, and it's trying to find the right dynamics between like incentivizing people to stake to secure a network, and trying to incentivize users to come and create activity and growth on the network. You could almost compare layer ones to like nations in terms of they're all competing for attention and activity. They're all looking to create maybe the most appealing environment they can for users and builders, and therefore incite growth. And like I was touching on earlier, Bitcoin and Ethereum were almost a perfectly free market by design, but that meant the miners could almost create a monopoly over over the blocks. Mm-hmm. And that like they would charge higher and higher prices because there was such a small amount of block space to get your transactions through. Whereas the dynamics of maybe newer blockchains and newer layer ones are slightly different, and they all have different constitutions, laws, incentives, and like they're all providing and offering, and it's that like competitive element that's maybe creating new opportunities. And I think the next, another thing that I'm excited about leading on from what we were chatting, maybe the DeFi opportunities, is the interoperability piece. I think that will be the next one, because they're all, I find this space at the moment like quite tribalistic, quite separated at certain moments, and that people find a little corner of the ecosystem. Everyone's here for the same, broadly probably got into like this space for mostly the same reasons, or out of interest in technology, or out of interest in like financial opportunities it presented. But still at certain moments, like along the way, it's gone from an environment sometimes of cooperation to a place of competition. Whereas realistically, the possibilities by connecting and weaving the webs of value together that all the different layer ones are growing is going to create like even greater pools of liquidity, and that are going to create even greater amounts of opportunity and create even greater compounded growth for the overall space, if that makes sense. The blockchains are only a means of interacting and transacting. They are a means to an end. They are not the end itself.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hope that made sense. So I do enjoy chatting more. Like the presentation, was tough for me.
Well,
I just lost my train of thought. Like
a couple of things that I'm realizing is like we probably need a modular kind of like this is what proof of stake means. This is what proof of like all of these like modular things. We should probably make almost an episode on each of these concepts to actually deep dive into these things, because I think one of the big things, right, like when we talk about education, obstacles to adoption, education in this space, is that there are so many different concepts that are somewhat important to understand and sometimes very complicated to understand. I remember being completely confused when I was starting to read all these white papers. It's like, okay, like what's all this, all these new words and all of this stuff. So I think maybe this is a good prompt to like we covered a lot of the ground in terms of like what is Web3 and all of the things it can do. I think we still probably need to get a little bit more into the granular building blocks in the next episodes. That being said, like I think we were talking about obstacles, and you were saying like, well, how is this space gonna like compete with a traditional space if we split up in tribes just because we're on like this one layer one and everybody else wants to be on the other, and then it becomes some sort of zero-sum game, which is like who captures the most value that's locked on that chain, rather than figuring out how to actually provide value to people around the world, regardless of like whatever ecosystem they choose, and how to make these ecosystems interoperate. So I think that's really a great point and a great pain point, I think, also for the community, the Web3 community being split up into all of these like separate tribes. So I think that's a great point. What do you see as a solution to that? Have you seen any good examples on how to bridge that gap? Have you I'm
not like personally like a developer, or don't have the level of technical understanding to understand how to solve the problems themselves, but I do know, like from looking around, like Cosmos and the ecosystem of Cosmos like seems to have a seamless like interoperability solution for connecting layer ones. And I know like at Helios, like we're like a proof of we run nodes, or a staking provider for Injective, and there's another blockchain that is being built on top of the Cosmos, which is going to be called Burnt. And having a look at some of the opportunities and the way they're able to seamlessly interconnect with each other and transfer value between each other. I suppose looking at that there's a great opportunity. There's a great opportunity in that space, and that they seem to have stumbled upon a solution that is proving popular and effective.
Yeah, Injective. If you want to talk about like just introduce that blockchain to whoever might not be, because that another like one of the good things and one of the interesting things I think like about these ecosystems is some of them provide really compelling solutions for niche markets, and that's fine. Like we need to become comfortable with like not having only one thing that can do one thing only, like one tool that can like if we try to use a screwdriver for every fucking task around the house, we would be pretty lost. Like it's fine to have a tool for specific problems, and one thing doesn't need to solve all of them. And this is, I think, why it's so important to realize that this you know, like this space is big and there is space for everyone truly. Injective is a blockchain that specializes in the financial sector, is my understanding.
Yeah, no, they're essentially looking to like revolutionize like the financial sector. The blockchain built for finance. They're the fastest layer one to my knowledge that currently exists at the moment. The block times or the block finalization times are like sub 1 second right now. I think they're like 0.9 or something like that. They've got multiple maybe functionalities and features that like separate them from, or separate like the platform, the blockchain, the technology from others in terms of auto executing smart contracts. Like it allows like even faster, like it allows like great opportunities in terms of like more innovation for applications, and how they can maybe allow like smart contracts or how they can develop them to create new solutions. And there's a huge amount of interoperability, and it obviously is interoperable with the entire Cosmos ecosystem. But then they've also built maybe bridges or opportunities to transfer value from like Ethereum and Solana as well. It's hugely interoperable, and they've got a perpetuals or a derivative DEX Helix. Again, it leverages like the speed of the chain, and it leverages smart contract infrastructure to provide like a seamless and high quality experience. And then like it's got all the other parts, like in terms of being decentralized, it's secure, all those boxes are ticked. So it is a great opportunity, and I've personally had fun like exploring it, and exploring, more importantly than it itself, exploring like what is built on top of it, and how the interoperability and how its functions have led to a thriving environment, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that is more important than the thing itself.
Yeah, I agree. And the question here is actually where I want to kind of pivot, or not pivot, transition to adoption and what that means, because like Injective solves a specific problem for a specific sector. It offers great solutions in that thing. Like we have, and I want to kind of feature that too. Galileo is a social media platform essentially built on the blockchain, built with Web3, and there are different solutions that are being developed that actually look at bringing in new people into the space, be it the financial sector, be it people who are interested in sharing their opinions, pictures, private things online with other people. Where do you see like that going, and like what do you think needs to still happen to kind of make that transition from people who aren't familiar with the space easier? I think the financial sector is actually less difficult, because I think they're used to complicated tech and complicated financial instruments, etc. So it kind of translates a little bit better. But where do you see kind of this gap between Web 2, Web 3 as it pertains more to like everyday solutions for your everyday customer?
So talking specifically about the social media aspect.
Whatever you want to, whichever example.
No, I get it. No, I understand. I suppose that's probably like one of the, like the financial sector, I do think is like more obvious, because I think more people are affected by the inefficiency and centralization as in they feel the tangible negative effects of like a lack of financial opportunity, of centralized permissioned control and access to credit, and some of these things are like, a lot of these things are like at least made more efficient, and there's a greater degree of opportunity available with DeFi and how it's more objective and trustless, and based on smart contracts rather than subjective judgments, about your about being given permission to participate, or permission to access opportunities. But I do think like social media is probably going to be a greater challenge, because people probably people are going to be less aware of the impact of centralization and the impact of maybe a lack of decentralization, maybe more so, and a centralized agenda being imposed on the platform. Like I was chatting earlier about like Twitter, like the platform we're on right now, YouTube, Meta. Like if you don't comply and adhere by the terms of service, your content can be removed from the platform. And at face value, that's like not that big a deal, I suppose. Like, but when you consider that, like essentially Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram are essentially how all the people of the world communicate with each other, it gives a very small amount of people quite a large amount of power over what can and cannot be discussed at scale, which really limits people's opportunity to have meaningful discussion if they are in contradiction to certain people's interests, which I think we're already seeing the manifestation of those problems, in terms of like the divisions that are emerging in society. Like we can see them emerging online, but I think like it's becoming more and more apparent, like in a day-to-day sense, like the divisiveness of opinion and people's inability to maybe find common ground to discuss on. Does that make sense? And I do think at some point it's probably going to take like a breaking point for people to realize of the necessity for decentralization, because I suppose free speech and the ability to discuss and communicate ideas should not be conditional. It should be like unconditional, and the ideas and the concepts should stand on their own. Like the ideas and concepts people are discussing, they shouldn't need to control the platform and control the discussion. The truth should be the aim. It shouldn't be about who is more right. It should be about what is right. Whereas at the moment, essentially, it seems like the platforms and the discussions on them are controlled by maybe the influences of money, and economic weight behind them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think still like the transition piece is the interesting part, right? Like I think there is maybe, hopefully, in a small community, I think a growing sense of what the issues are, and I think there's some amount of like waking up to it, especially when there's like scandals around billionaires buying platforms, and that's like very clearly a centralization of power and a lot of influence, and like, you know, obviously Meta and Alphabet and etc., like basically owning all the means of communication, as you alluded to, is I think becoming more apparent. I think there's also another large swaths of the population don't care. And so I think there is kind of a need to educate on that issue and why it might make sense and might be very practical in very real senses, for us to change the way that data is stored, kept, transferred, the same as value is. And I think that transition is happening right now very slowly, and maybe there's even movements that are counteracting that, and it's going maybe in the wrong direction in some sense, since we like the actual things that we do see in the world are centralization, increasing centralization, not decreasing in centralization. So that's an interesting thing, like that you think that there's like basically this pain point. There's some questions in the chat that I'll get to towards the end. I wanted to touch quickly, since we're kind of running out of time, on NFTs, just because they're fun, and I know that you're involved in that too, and you still, I think, have a profile picture of a dragon, right? I wanted to see like what you think about the development that you've seen in this space, when we're talking about like what the current obstacles are, explaining, and it's very hard to explain, and onboarding. I wanted to see your opinion on like the NFT space, and maybe what role NFTs can play in bridging this gap that we've been discussing for the past 10 minutes or so. Where do you think that? Do you think that's a piece of the puzzle, or do you think that's just degens doing degen things because they think it's fun to speculate and try to make money off?
I just obviously so in terms of me, I just have that profile picture for a really long time, and I actually got Twitter blue and tried to change my profile picture, and it wouldn't let me change my profile picture for some reason. So I got stuck with it. It just said it has to be under review, and it just seems to be perpetually under review. So I'm stuck with a dragon, but I know I like the dragon. It's been there a while. Shout out to Nogan, but it's obviously, I suppose, everything. The space, it will evolve into, the technology just is what the technology is. NFTs are what NFTs are. They just allow people to prove digital ownership of an asset and link it to a wallet address that they own, and then by extension of owning that wallet address, it can connect them to certain opportunities or values in relation to the ecosystem of the asset. Or if we go further, there could be fractionalization of assets built upon the blockchain and represented as NFTs. And if we looked at I know I saw I saw recently some developments in terms of real estate and fractionalized real estate opportunities being built. And I think earlier I was chatting. There's going to be, the technology is evolving, and the real use cases, or the more evolved and sophisticated, if we're going to say use cases, are going to become apparent as people become more familiar with the technology itself. But right now it is probably just going through that evolutionary stage of almost it's being proven that the technology can work and the technology does work before people are really investing and committing large amounts of value, or projects of large amounts of capital, or projects that already have I'm going to say if we're going to take the likes of Facebook or Twitter, because we were just chatting about them, they're probably going to be more hesitant to commit more fully to these more experimental technologies as they might see them, because they've already got quite a large foothold in the market as it currently exists. Whereas obviously for yourself with on-chain smokers, there's a great opportunity for newer brands to be more agile, to connect quicker and mobilize more capital and mobilize a community, and align ownership and align incentives at scale than maybe it was before. And I think the validity of the idea is shown in the fact that there are more traditional brands getting involved in NFTs. So we saw Starbucks were getting involved in NFTs. I see lots of athletes releasing NFTs. I see lots of sports teams releasing NFT collections. We obviously had the sports leagues in America. There's So Rare. There was Top Shot. I can't remember what it was. I can't remember what it was called. So long ago since Top Shot was a Top Shot. It was Top Shot. But I suppose there are more and more traditional or bigger institutions getting involved in the space, which I suppose is in itself gives it a degree of legitimacy and shows the evolution of it, that it is providing some sort of value. But if we take, and I touched on earlier, Taylor Swift
Yeah.
Like right now, at least over in Ireland, getting tickets to her concert is like crazy. It's like there's a huge wait list, and only a small amount of people got a link, and it was chosen at random. So
And they cost like what, £300 and
yeah,
upwards of
and
that.
like they're crazy expensive. Like, listen, they'd probably be crazy expensive anyway. Like, even if there were NFTs involved, but there's probably a huge amount of Taylor Swift fans that have been fans of Taylor Swift since she was a singer in 2012, 2013, 2014, when she wasn't quite the phenomenon she is now, like where people are just flocking to her concerts, and like I'm delighted for her. She's doing a great job, and obviously she's really, really popular. But there's no way of discerning between the people who supported her earlier and the people who just want to get her tickets and resell them at a really high price to people who are true fans of hers. Whereas if from the very earliest moment she controlled all her assets, so tickets to her shows were sold as NFTs to her fans, and they could hold those NFTs in their wallets. And when the time comes 10 years later, okay, I will reward these people who have these tickets, and they will be whitelisted for the opportunity to buy tickets from an upcoming show, if that makes sense. And it gives them, it redefines the artist-fan relationship, if you get me, in that there's a far greater upside to supporting upcoming artists or up and coming artists from a fan perspective, and becoming part of the community and being brought along on the journey of their success, and being able to reward and align the incentives among your community and with your brand, if you want to call it. So OCS, we're going to say with a brand rather than artist. But obviously you guys have the opportunity now going forward, let's say the evolution of the brand and the brand growth, and 10 years from now you're in a drastically different place from where you are in terms of your popularity or the demand for your products.
Will be the Taylor Swift of cannabis.
No, but the awareness, the opportunities. But you'll be able to go back and say okay, these 1,000 people were with us from day one, so they're coming with us everywhere we go. And then at a certain moment, those people might go, listen, this, if we go back to the free market, the supply and the demand, those opportunities you're presenting might be so valuable that people just want priority access. So they'll go to those day one customers, and they'll go, okay, you have one of the original limited amount of NFTs, so we'll buy that off you, and we want all the opportunities that presents. And it almost gives the fans, the community, a greater level of ownership in the development and evolution of brands, of artists. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good note to kind of wrap it up on after an hour here as well, which is there is so many things that Web3 really enables that are very hard or almost impossible to do in Web2, just because of the way it's structured, just of the way it's set out, just of the way it connects people directly without intermediaries owning everything in between. And I think that's a really strong value proposition, and something to really explore in ways that I think aren't really explored right now by and large by what the space is doing. I think there's a lot of solutions without problems, and I think we need to go from actually solving things for people, actually looking at pain points and really addressing those things, rather than just releasing a new product that will impress some devs but nobody else will ever use it or even look at it. So I think that's really good, and I think you mentioned a few very great use cases there. Taylor Swift thing. I think that's a great. I mean, those tickets, and we just did OCS. We just did a smaller-ish party, right? 500 people. Web3 ticketing. Who knows? The next anniversary party is coming around, and who knows what the perks will be for people who can, just prove that they have this ticket, or somebody else will buy it off them to get those perks that somebody else can sell. So this like true ownership is really a big thing. There was a question in the chat about the Haddam launch, and since you also mentioned it a few times, whether OCS, I think it's personal, or is it OCS? OCS will participate in this launch. We unstaked about a quarter of our project wallet, and we'll enter the liquid staking tool. But there's still, I got some advice from our blockchain advisor, Kevin Leiden, and he said to not extend yourselves or ourselves into that. Personally, I'm also allocating a small amount of the portfolio, but I hope that answers that question. Are you planning on aping in, as they say, or are you?
Yeah, man, I'm just gonna like explore and just see what's up. In the past, like I probably would be, like I suppose, and this is another evolution of just being here, and I suppose being in the space. And I'll leave it on this. I won't hold anyone too much longer, but being in the space for a certain period of time teaches you a certain amount of like the self-custodial element and like the permissionless nature, the like I'm gonna say like lack of regulation, you know, the fact that it's just like almost, it's very capitalistic in nature. It's a very efficient space, in that like it just rewards good decisions. And like, you know, there's no real safety nets as such. Just leads me to being a little bit more balanced about like how I approach things. So like I'm just looking forward to seeing how Haddam develop. Like I'm really excited about the liquid staking. I'm really excited about how it's going to unlock like funds for the ecosystem and for the growth of the ecosystem and for activity within the ecosystem that were previously locked in staking. So that will like really incite growth in terms of like activity on the lending platform, activity on the liquid staking. So essentially it's just unlocking a huge portion of liquidity that was previously like not possible to be unlocked in the form of like the tokenization of the staked assets, and a representation of them being on the blockchain. But like I definitely will participate, and I'll just see how it goes, and I'll just play it as it comes and do the thing that's right. You know, I suppose it's up to everybody to just assess the protocol, see what it offers, see if the opportunities align with what they're looking to achieve, on a personal sense, and then take the appropriate action. But like I definitely have a more patient and balanced outlook than I previously might have, like when I just like started a few years ago. So if we're going to say one thing that probably has changed in relation to me. But I have to say thank you very much, man, for the discussion, genuinely. I know the PowerPoint itself, I got a little bit like flustered at some point during it.
I also switched some slides. I don't know if one slide disappeared in the middle of it. I don't know.
so like, well, that's okay, man. Like, look, I really appreciate. I think the discussion was like really enjoyable, and really excited for everything you're doing and you're building. Like, I think you're very modest in terms of like you are one of the innovators in this space. Like, you know, you're actively building, you're actively contributing, you're actively, like, the things you're doing are pioneering and leading the way for other people to follow suit and to follow in your footsteps, if that makes sense. Someone has to take the first steps, regardless of how small or big they may or may not be. Someone has to lead, someone has to start, and it's just putting one foot in front of the other and seeing where things lead, you know? And I have to commend you on everything you're doing.
That's very kind. Thank you. Likewise, very enjoyable discussion. Yeah, we'll wrap it up here. Thank you everybody who watched. Thank you to everyone who will watch. The next, speaking of pioneers, which, you know, that's way too kind towards me, but the next episode is already locked up. I'll announce it here before I announce it anywhere else. We'll be with a Web3 gaming pioneer who sold his previous platform to Ubisoft for about 60 million euros. And is now building a Web3 game. We'll talk to him about like why the hell he's doing that to himself. and find out a little bit more about this intersection, because I think it's one of the, it's obviously a huge sector industry, the gaming industry, and I think that's going to be a super interesting discussion to talk to somebody who was very successful in the Web2 space and decided to transition to pioneer a new path for his industry in the Web3 space. So that will be sometime, I think, in 2 weeks or something on a Thursday. I'll update everyone on that, but I'm super excited about that. Thank you so much, John. We'll reconnect very soon. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, the stream has ended. We're just on a call.
Sweet man.